Awesome. Looks like we have quite a few people on. I'm sure we'll get more, but we'll go ahead and get started. Again, I am Alexa Tinsley. I am the Director of Programs here at Jett Foundation. Again, thank you all for joining us as we welcome ITF Therapeutics and their team to talk about DUVYZAT today. I know that this is something that the community wants more information about, so I'm very excited that we're able to share that with you today. So today we welcome Scott Baber, who is the head of medical affairs, and Caroline Allen, who is the head of U.S. patient advocacy and communications for ITF Therapeutics. Scott will be the one that's presenting today, but Caroline is here to answer questions at the end as well, just so you know who everybody is. So before we get started, I do just want to mention a few things. At the end of the webinar, we will have a live Q&A. There is a question box. For me, it's at the bottom right, two little question boxes put together, like little chat boxes. So if you do have questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to drop those into the questions box. We do our best to monitor the chat, but we don't always get to all of them. We are also streaming to Facebook Live, so if there are any questions that come through there, we try to get to those as well. If there are any questions that we don't get to, we will send them off to Caroline and Scott to see if we are able to get them answered. Please be aware that they can't answer all questions, but we'll do their best to answer as many as they can. The webinar is being recorded, so if you have to log off for any reason, or you know anyone that was unable to make this webinar but wanted to make this webinar, we will have it live on YouTube for you next week. It will also be on Facebook that you can stream at any time and share too. So if you need that, it's available to you as well. And with that, I will stop talking and I will hand it off to Scott.
Thank you so much. And hello, everybody. I'd say good morning and good afternoon. I think most of you that I've seen pop up are coming from the East Coast, but for any West Coasters, good morning. And thanks for the opportunity, giving both Caroline and myself the opportunity to come speak to you and introduce DUVYZAT. We're excited for the time that we get to spend with you. We also, before going into the actual presentation, just want to recognize how important of a time this is for the Duchenne community, and it's absolute honor for us to be able to talk to you through our updates that we have to share with you today. For today, this presentation is mainly based on U.S. information. So we're going to focus on the U.S. audience here for the presentation, and I'm going to split it into three specific sections. So to start, I'm going to give an overview of how we think givinostat works in Duchenne, and then I'm going to walk through some of the key data that was responsible for the approval here in the U.S. for DUVYZAT in Duchenne. And then finally, I'm excited to talk about our patient access services and really introduce those services to you before opening it up to questions and answers. So to start here, I want to read the indication and say that DUVYZAT is an HDAC inhibitor, and we will talk about what that is in the following slide. But it's an HDAC inhibitor that's indicated for the treatment of Duchenne muscular dystrophy and individuals who are 6 years of age or older. It really is. DUVYZAT is a first of its kind. It's a non-steroidal option for individuals with all genetic variants of DMD. So let's switch to the presentation itself and first talk about how we think givinostat works in Duchenne. So we know that the lack of functional dystrophin, it results in muscle damage, mainly on contraction. But we also know that the lack of functional dystrophin results in chronic inflammation, as well as impairment of our ability for muscles to repair when there is muscle damage. And that also leads to increased scarring and increased fat deposition where the muscle should be regenerating. So what we're thinking here for how givinostat might be working really comes down to how the cells are behaving and certain proteins that are dysregulated, or what we call could be in something in the case of this protein that we're looking at, which is called HDAC, is that this is an overdrive. It's acting in overdrive to lead to increased inflammation, decreases in the ability of the muscle to repair itself, and an increase in scarring and fat deposition. We have both preclinical or animal models, as well as early studies in individuals living with Duchenne that show that there is promise that we can reduce the inflammation that you see in the disease, as well as being able to improve the repair mechanisms for the muscle regeneration, and then decreases in scarring, as well as decreases in fat deposition. That leads us to say, okay, if it's working in these animal models and then early studies of individuals living with Duchenne, what would we see in a larger study? And can we see that effect happening in a clinical setting? And so I'm going to introduce to you now our pivotal phase 3 EPIDUS clinical study. This is the study that was conducted that led to the approval of DUVYZAT in Duchenne. And really, this study looked at both the efficacy as well as the safety of DUVYZAT for the treatment of Duchenne. And the study was 18 months, and it was a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled study. So there were a total of 179 individuals who had a confirmed diagnosis of Duchenne. They received about 66% of those individuals received DUVYZAT, and the other 33% received placebo. And DUVYZAT was administered twice a day as an oral liquid suspension. A couple key inclusion criteria to enter the study. Individuals needed to be at least 6 years of age or older. We can see in these brackets here that the range of age was between 6 and 15 years of age, but the mean age of the study itself was about 9.8 years. All individuals needed to be ambulatory, and a couple of parameters here that they needed to fulfill. So first, they needed to complete 2 4-stair climb assessments, and they had to do that within at least 3 seconds in less than 8 seconds. They also had to do that 2 times in a row. Next, they also needed to be able to get up off of the floor within 10 seconds. And then the final important entry criteria here, or key entry criteria, is that all individuals needed to be on a stable dose of corticosteroids, and they needed to stay on that stable dose for the entire 18 months of the study. So let's turn to the clinical trial results, and we'll focus on the primary efficacy endpoint, which was the change from baseline to month 18 on the 4-stair climb test. And so what you can see in the table is you have both individuals who received DUVYZAT as well as placebo. And what we can see in this first column here of mean baseline 4-stair climb, they were about even for both groups of about 3.39 and 3.48 seconds respectively for DUVYZAT and placebo-treated individuals. But what I want to point to next is what that change was at 18 months. And so what we can see is the mean change time for individuals that received DUVYZAT was 1.25 seconds, whereas individuals receiving placebo, that was 3.03 seconds. So there was still an increase in time to climb those stairs for both groups, but that was reduced in the DUVYZAT treated individuals compared to the placebo treated individuals. And the difference here was about 1.78 seconds, and that was statistically significant. So we reached our primary efficacy endpoint. This was about a difference of about 40% when comparing the individuals who were treated with DUVYZAT compared to placebo. And then if you look at key secondary endpoints, we saw consistent effects that we saw with the primary efficacy endpoint. So what I want to note here is that individuals who received DUVYZAT, they experienced less worsening on the North Star Ambulatory Assessment compared to individuals who received placebo. This was nominally significant, but not statistically significant. So next, I will change and we'll talk about the safety profile and specifically the adverse reactions. I want to point out the most common adverse reactions that you can see in this table, which for DUVYZAT treated individuals compared to placebo, and those were diarrhea, abdominal pain, decreased platelet counts or thrombocytopenia, nausea and vomiting, and increased triglycerides or hypertriglyceridemia, and fever. So a couple of things to point out here within our safety data is that only 2% of individuals that discontinued the study because of an adverse reaction. With regard to management, their temporary treatment interruption or dose modification, if needed, this proved useful for managing the majority of adverse reactions that we saw in the EPIDUS phase 3 study. A final point is for all of these adverse events, what we saw is that most were reported as mild to moderate in severity. So important safety information that I want to highlight here is that low platelet counts in your blood can result with treatment with DUVYZAT or thrombocytopenia. There can be increased levels of fat, triglycerides in your blood, and frequent watery stools or diarrhea and vomiting can be associated with treatment with DUVYZAT. You should also, before taking DUVYZAT, tell your healthcare provider about all of your medical conditions, including if you have any heart problems or if you're taking any medicines that could increase your chance for irregular heart rhythms. Finally, if you have any bleeding problems, you should also talk to your healthcare provider. You could, of course, tell your healthcare provider about all of the medicines that you take. And finally, I'll leave you with that DUVYZAT can cause serious side effects, including changes in the electrical activity of your heart, and this is called QT prolongation. So now that we've gone over how we think DUVYZAT works, the clinical trial data that led to the approval here in the US of DUVYZAT in Duchenne, I want to introduce to you our patient access program, which is called ITF ARC. And as the title says, the ITF ARC is here to provide personalized support to help serve the Duchenne community. So we have 3 different buckets here. The ITF ARC is here to navigate through insurance. So for example, we support prior authorizations and appeals as is needed for individuals seeking to receive DUVYZAT treatment. We also have access solutions. So we have copay assistance that's for eligible commercially insured individuals whose healthcare plan covers DUVYZAT. And then finally, we have education and adherence services, really so you can have all the information that you need to understand everything about DUVYZAT. So this is exciting for us to send to you or give you this information. ITF ARC is now live. You can go to DUVYZAT.com to get more resources around ITF ARC. One final update is that we still plan on DUVYZAT becoming available in Q3 of 2024. And if you have any questions about DUVYZAT, please discuss with your child's healthcare provider. Finally, we want to thank the Duchenne community for working with us on this. And we feel that having your feedback, and insights about ITF Therapeutics as well as DUVYZAT is critical as we move forward, and we want to continue and partner with you in the ongoing basis. So please continue to share with us all of the questions that you have, all of your feedback. We can't improve unless we hear from you. So that is it for me and going through the presentation, and I will turn it over for the question and answer session.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Scott. I think that this is really good information. And again, I appreciate you sharing it. I did have a question come in that I think would be, just before we start the Q&A, good to kind of just talk about. So can you just do a little bit of clarification? So it's the first non-steroidal treatment, but it was tested with steroids. So can you just kind of clarify how those work together and what that means as a non-steroidal treatment?
Absolutely. So it's the first HDAC inhibitor. So it works on a different mechanism than steroids. Importantly, and as we highlighted in the entry criteria, individuals needed to be on a stable course of steroids prior to joining EPIDUS, and they needed to maintain on that course of steroids throughout the entire 18-month EPIDUS study. That's really important because when we talk about DUVYZAT versus placebo in the study, that is with steroids. So that is DUVYZAT plus steroids compared to placebo plus steroids.
Perfect. And I think that's a perfect lead into this question. Please clarify that this is an add-on and not a steroid replacement, and the benefit to non-ambulatory versus ambulatory.
Yeah, so it's not a steroid replacement. It acts on a different mechanism. That is regarding the treatment is something that you will need to discuss with your healthcare provider. But again, the study included individuals who were receiving a stable course of steroids for the entire 18 months. So thinking about ambulant and non-ambulant, our DUVYZAT is indicated for individuals who are 6 years of age or older who have Duchenne. That includes both ambulant and non-ambulant.
Awesome, thank you. And then again, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A box. We do have another question. Would it be feasible for an individual affected by long QT syndrome or other cardiac arrhythmias to have access to this drug under close medical supervision, or is it completely contraindicated for these individuals? And I know you spoke about this a little bit, but just wanted to bring up this specific question.
Yeah, so there are no contraindications for DUVYZAT with respect to QT. You will want to discuss this with your healthcare provider. We do recommend that if you have a QT of greater than 500 milliseconds or greater than 60 milliseconds from baseline of treatment with DUVYZAT, to withhold DUVYZAT. But again, please contact your healthcare provider to discuss this further.
Excellent. Let me see if there are any questions from Facebook. Again, if anybody has any questions about DUVYZAT or the patient access piece, please feel free to ask. If you can't figure out the Q&A box, because I know it's not always easy, please go ahead and put it in the chat. I do not see any, but I'm going to give it another minute. Again, Scott, thank you. Caroline, thank you for being on for moral support and to answer questions as well. We appreciate both of you. We do have a question. When will it be available outside of the USA?
Yeah, so right now, DUVYZAT is approved in the US. Our European colleagues, they're working on filing. They filed in the EU, and they're working on preparing that for an EMA approval. And they're also planning for other filings. And so again, this specific presentation is for the approval of DUVYZAT here in the US.
Awesome, thank you so much. Since DUVYZAT was only tested in ambulant boys, do we know how it will help non-ambulant boys?
Yeah, so the study, as you stated, the study was the EPIDUS study was done in individuals who are ambulant. We do have an ongoing study outside of the US in non-ambulant boys.
Perfect. Awesome. Any other questions? So I see a question in here about the cost of the medicine. So I will let Caroline speak to that piece a little bit.
Yeah, so we're happy to take any questions on cost offline. What we really want to make sure is shared with you all today is the services that we're providing. And I think Scott did a great job providing an overview of ITF ARC. I think what we want to really ensure is that the availability of the treatment, we're making it available to those who would like to go on it and who have the conversation with their physician. These services, the ITF Access team has done a really incredible job of creating these services, making sure that they're as comprehensive as possible, so that, as we recognize we may have some conversations that need to happen with the insurers, but we're really working diligently to ensure that we are able to support the families and the physicians throughout that process as well as possible. So more than happy to address any of those additional questions. And again, please keep an eye out on DUVYZAT.com as you look at ITF ARC and have any additional questions. You can feel free to reach out to us.
Awesome. We do have a question about carriers. Any studies for this in the future?
So yeah, so right now we don't have any currently ongoing studies. As we update our clinical development program, we can provide updates.
Awesome. And I think this is a really important question. Can DUVYZAT be taken with other therapies?
So DUVYZAT is not contraindicated with other therapies. Again, it is really important that you have that conversation with your healthcare provider on when and where for DUVYZAT.
Yeah, and something I'll say too is, you know, as new therapies come into the fold and as approvals come into play, just making sure that you are speaking with your healthcare provider to make sure that, you know, whatever, even outside of Duchenne therapies, that whatever medications you're on are being considered with any therapy is important. Is it able to be used with young adults with comorbidities and not on steroids?
So yeah, it's not contraindicated with individuals who have comorbidities, and that's something. There is no within the label. You do not have to be on steroids, but we'll again defer to the treatment decision that you make with your healthcare provider.
And this question here, I'm going to rephrase it a little bit. So I know that you had spoken about studies for the non-ambulatory population. Do you, and you don't have to answer this question, but is that including older adults or in that age range?
Yes. So it's for non-ambulatory individuals.
Perfect. Good questions, everybody.
And thank you.
Any other questions? Well, we have Caroline and Scott here with us. Let me check Facebook. There is a question, what about for a 10-year-old? As Scott said, it is approved for ages 6 and up. So I would recommend that you speak to your healthcare provider about what that looks like for your family. Well, awesome. Thank you guys so much. Again, if you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out to myself. I can definitely get them to Caroline and Scott. If they'll answer it, they absolutely will. So thank you all for being here today. Thank you all for, you know, hopping on and sharing your questions and being present. So we appreciate all of you. Hopefully we see you again sometime soon in the future in person or not. Ooh, we have more questions, of course. I think there's a question about a launch date for DUVYZAT. They did say Q3 of this year, so keep an eye out for that. It's DUVYZAT.com, right, Caroline? For more.
Yes, I was just going to say, please, for updates, and I know we're in Q3, so I know everybody is anxiously awaiting. We are working with an incredible sense of urgency to try to bring this to the community as quickly as possible. But I highly recommend just signing up on DUVYZAT.com, and you will be able to get updates as they become available. And we'll certainly, you know, continue to communicate with Jett Foundation and some of the other advocacy organizations when we have more news to make sure it's reaching as many people as possible and as quickly as possible. But thank you guys so much for your questions, and Jett, thank you so much for having us, Alexa. We're delighted to have the opportunity to connect with the community. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us directly as well. We really welcome the questions, welcome the feedback, and look forward to keeping the conversation going.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everybody. Again, Scott and Caroline, thank you. Have a wonderful day, and we will see you all soon.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye, guys.